Hello, Louise. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks, Veronica. I am dealing with the global pandemic in the best way that I can, which is a bit mental some days and very on top of it other days.
Yeah, yeah. I think I've said this in every interview so far, but it's very up and down, as my brother said in week 2. So yeah, it's very, very up and down.
Yeah, I mean, all in all, I can't complain that much. Myself and Alan, he's self-employed, I'm self-employed. I work the mornings, he works the afternoon. My children, generally speaking, have been so much better with it than I thought they would have been. They always play with kids in the estate all the time, and now they know they're not allowed to do that at all. I thought they would go apeshit, but actually, really, they've just taken it on the chin and they've been fine. So, in general terms, I can't really complain, but it is just all a bit head melty as well,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know.
And how are you managing it all? Like, how are you managing yourself in it all?
Um, I mean, like I am and I amn't. I was just saying to somebody earlier today. So we got in a routine together for me to work and him to work and just to get our bits done. So, for example, I'm presenting a show in the Fringe Festival in September. So, as now, I still think it's happening. So, I have to work in the morning times as though it's happening, but it could get cancelled at any moment.
Mm.
And Alan's a lawyer, so he's working. He has to go to court for some, important or urgent cases. So, he has to go and do that. Not all the time, but sometimes. So, I feel like the routine, I was handling it, but then with the Easter weekend, so we Good Friday off, Easter Monday off, then Alan had to go to court all day on Tuesday. And yeah, I wasn't handling it. I wasn't my best self yesterday, put it that way. So I was like, sometimes I feel like I'm on top of it and it's going grand. And yesterday I was like, give me some space, you know.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
So today in my like professional self with like a little bit of eyeliner on and, earrings to do an interview, it's like a different situation. But yesterday it was like, yeah, up and down, highs and lows.
yeah, yeah. I think I totally identify, but in a different way because I'm on my own, so it's a weird space. So I've seen
Yeah.
people from a distance, but I haven't had a hug since the 12th of March. So it's a really bizarre.
Yeah.
It's a really bizarre situation. But
Yeah.
I've taken to feeding the pigeons out the yard, so that's keeping me interested in in the outside nature.
Do you have any repeat visitors and stuff? Like, are they the
Yeah,
same ones coming back?
yeah.
Okay.
There's 4 of them now. Yeah, with a 5th one that comes and goes. Yeah,
Any names?
no, not yet. I haven't imposed that yet, but I'm getting there. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm watching Who's Who. So there's one that has a sort of a something wrong with his eye, so he looks a bit like a pirate. Um, but yeah, I've seen my family and talked to them obviously, but no, not nearer than over 2 meters.
Yeah.
It's all a bit.
Also, multiple Zoom calls. I had my 40th, but I didn't have my 40th. Do you know what I mean? Because of this. So loads of and also there was my niece's birthday was on the 18th of March, and then my brother's birthday was on the 6th of April. So anyway, we've had multiple Zoom calls with big families, and they are actually a whole other piece of work as well.
Yeah,
Like they are very stressful. On my birthday, I was like, can we just finish this now, please? I want to cut the cake, rather than being like, oh, thank you, that's great.
yeah,
Because nobody could hear anyone. They're totally wild, totally out of control.
yeah.
I was like, this is lovely and everything, but I want some chocolate Guinness cake. So
Well, thanks for taking the time, Louise, in all of that and all of this.
this is a pleasure.
Ah, ah,
No, it is. I'm delighted to do it.
ah.
Very much so. Yeah.
Um, so I know you haven't had a chance to meet the community of Fatima Groups United, especially the Culture Club or anything yet, but hopefully in the future unknown that will happen and
Mm-hmm.
organise that. So I thought a good place to start would just be to maybe share a bit about the type of work that you make. And so I've definitely I was looking over your website again, and I'm not sure one of them, but I've definitely seen All Things Considered. It's a nice place
Yeah.
to start. Mother
Yeah.
You,
Yeah.
and most recently, This Is the Funeral of Your Life. All
Yeah.
of which are like magical adventures and bringing people together, and
Thank you.
usually involve like theatre people and people from other communities. So I want
Yeah.
to start with, what is it that makes you want to make that type of work, which is inherently about community and bringing people together?
Yeah, it's really interesting because when you said that to me, when you sent me the questions beforehand, I felt like you were able to articulate something about my work that I always find it difficult to articulate. But for me, there's something really special about groups of people coming together. And I don't mean that in a like writing your Arts Council application way. I mean like when you come together into a room to try and make something happen.
Yeah.
So for example, with Mother You, I just finished masters in community work, and I was making something that I was making a show that was about the economic downturn, I think, or was about empty spaces, empty buildings. And I was like, well, what do you do with, how do you activate an empty space, for example? So there was a big warehouse in Smithfield, and I started to make a show, design a show for there, and it ended up being, I don't really know if I knew exactly what it was going to be, but I knew I wanted to make a show in an abandoned building because there was so many of them across everywhere in Dublin, and it reflected loads of sadness and loads of despondency and isolation and economic devastation, and loads of things that every day when you were walking around town you could see them, and they were this big totemic representation of failure.
Yeah.
Failure of the state and individual failure, and things really going tits up, and loads of money being pumped into things that didn't work out in the end. And I don't know why, but empty buildings, I find empty buildings really, and this was before we had so much ever-present discussion about the homeless crisis. But so I find empty buildings or empty shops or places that have closed down when somebody has tried to do something and it hasn't worked out, I create these whole stories and I feel a sadness, or really, I don't know why I'm so empathetic with the failure of it. Even when it's the big bad guys, you never wish badness upon them. Anyway, so I'd finished my master's in community work, and I think that was really, really, really present with me. So I ended up making a show in this big 11,000 square foot warehouse about community activism, essentially, about how when, like, it's really small, it can be really small changes that happen in small parochial meetings with cups of tea on YMCA chairs with fluorescent lights in the building. Like, that can be where the change starts to happen. And I was really interested in the kind of variety of people that come together, even the oddball nature of that, how people come together and you don't know, around a particular cause, and that's how change happens. So when I was making that show about community activism, I ended up making it about, my mother was part of a bog development group in Abbeyleix, County Laois, which is where I'm from, and the community there got together and went against Board Namona basically because they were starting to harvest the bogs, but they hadn't been at the bog for years and years and years, so it was a beautiful conservation area, and they ended up, through their own community activism, through a bit of Schlevenism and a bit of tactical buffoonery, like pretending they didn't know what was going on but actually blocking entrances with broken down JCBs and things like that, they managed to reclaim 500 acres of bogland for the community, and now it's used all the time. People go on bog walks, people go out with their horses there, so sorry, this is quite a long-winded way to say it, but what I'm saying is I feel like I'm always interested in many ways that people come together. So that was one piece of community activism. I'm also really interested in the dynamic of groups of people coming together in a room to try and make art.
Yeah.
So, and also you mentioned, so sometimes I work with professional performers, sometimes I work with non-professional performers, and sometimes I work in a community context, and sometimes it's like a hodgepodge of all of those things together. So that's, Mother You was quite like that, because we had non-performers, professional performers, and then a choir of over 55s who hadn't performed in shows before. But I guess I'm interested in the dynamic of what happens when you bring all those people together, and the dynamic of telling stories that are supposed to seem kind of like plain or mundane or not highly dramatic, and giving them an artistic language and making them, it's not about actually making them dramatic, because that sounds like bombastic, but actually it's about giving them an artistic life, I suppose.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
The one that really resonated with me, and I can remember seeing it, I think I saw it in Project Cube, is the all things considered, it's a good place it's a nice place to start.
Yeah.
And I just kind of relived a little bit of it, and just the extraordinary premise of it, and what you did with trying to engage strangers in this case.
Mm-hmm.
And when you tell us about that.
So this was also, so that was 2011. So it was also just smash, bash, crash. Like it was only just the second year maybe into the crash or something. And all of the narratives around it, I felt like all of the time in the newspaper, everybody was always talking about the economy. They were always talking about money. They were talking about banks. They were talking about buildings. And they were never talking about real people. And I even remember, like, when I would talk about this and I would say, you know, look, there's real people in the country and nobody ever tells those stories. And I feel it took kind of a year or two later for there to be the individual ghost estate stories and stuff like that. But I remember in 2011, my feeling was that the way in which the country was represented was only that we were banks or financial or economical, and there was no other narrative, and it was all about mortgages, and there was no stories behind it. And I found that really frustrating. And I wanted to tell stories or to, you know, because the constant narrative was that we were fucked, we're smashed, everything's gone. But I wanted to try and make something as a reaction to that. And I even remember people going, really? Yeah. Like I was on an artist retreat in Anna and explaining to somebody, no, I really want to connect with the real life people. And I feel like there's people out there, there's good people, there's there's a lot of heart out there, there's a lot of community out there. And I remember the other artists being like, okay, like, right. Like I was made to feel like it was a very naive thing for me to do.
Okay.
And to be honest, actually, there's aspects, it's really interesting that you talked to me about that show, because nobody ever wants to talk to me about that show, because it's definitely one of my less successful shows. But one of the really interesting things for me is it's like where I broke through the idea of just making work with yourself and other artists, and to try to reach out beyond yourself and to try to connect with real people, real stories, real events, real communities. So, you know, we weren't funded or anything like that. So we worked within the resources that we had. So we were like, okay, let's print up an image. It was myself and two other performers in it, Kate Nicanani and Stephen O'Rourke. Let's print up an image of the three of us, and then let's write a thank you card to people. Let's write a letter a day each to each of the 32 counties for a week, because that's what we could afford. So, like, actually it's not cheap to post 300 letters when you don't have any funding. Do you know what I mean? So we posted a letter a day to each of the 32 counties to people, and we thanked them for random acts of kindness, for holding the bus when I was running late, for smiling at me as passed on the street. You know, in some ways I think it's kind of interesting or kind of naive, but also I'm really into the like openness and heart of it, that, you know, I hadn't done all my work in community work or socially engaged art, so I wasn't as informed, which is kind of good and not so good, in that I might have been able to develop the idea a little bit more if I'd already had all that learning. But also it was a very open, like the spirit in it is very open and pure, I think, for the reason why I wanted to do it. So anyway, then we had to select, who are you going to write to? Like, how do you decide? So we were like, well, let's pick somebody who is, I can't remember what the terminology was, but like somebody who's a community worker, provides a service, so like a nurse, a guard, or And then we were like, let's write to people in numbered housing, let's write to somebody who's a teacher, so we had this categorization of how we would write to people. And then so we wrote the card and then just sent it off. So it was actually very interesting, because it ended up getting picked up on weddingsonline.ie. Like, some woman was writing on the wedding forum going, here girls, has anybody heard of this? And and saying that, you know, we didn't explain properly who we were. We just signed, like, it was, the whole idea was that it was supposed to be this anonymous card that you got from this stranger that thanked you for being a human being who contributed in some way to the world, and that everybody deserves love. And I think some people were just completely freaked out by it. Fair enough. Like, honestly, fair enough. so it got picked up on weddingsonline.ie. So some people thought there was this whole thread, which actually we made it into the show. You know, some people thought, oh, that's nice. Some people thought, stupid artists. Some people thought, stay away from them, sounds dangerous girls. You know, there was all these different perceptions of it. There was one story of a guy who was a teacher, who was a principal. Yeah, we wrote to principals. So there was a principal who came to see the show with his daughter, and he was really scared, and his daughter was with him, and basically he'd had some sort of accusation against him from a student before, and anyway the whole thing had been disproved, but it really affected him and his mental health, and then he was like really worried about this, and he thought I was her who had written to him, and why did we write to him? I know. And then but then his daughter was like, came with him to protect him, to make sure it was okay. And then afterwards he was like, no, it was great. It was absolutely great. It was wonderful. God, I just had no idea. And you'll understand my skepticism now. And I was just like, yeah, you know, so I can totally understand the flaws in the work as well.
Yeah.
You know, like some people scraped out their address and posted it back to me, because we had a return address on everything, you know. And then I remember just afterwards, I got a letter from somebody, some charity or something like that, and I was like, how did they get my address? You know, completely not thinking that like we had done the exact same thing. I was like, that's so weird, your address should be private, like it's not about the elections. I was like, okay, yeah. So anyway, I'm really glad that it happened, that I made that show, and it was nice to have understood that I wanted to make work outside of just my own story. And the other thing I think that I realized in that is that I want to make story about real people, real events, you know, engage with real stories. My work is always developed from that, and it can be high art after that, but I'm just not really, I'm going to adapt Shakespeare, or I'm going to, you know, and I think plays are great. Like I actually do. I really like good, solid plays, but I have learned now that I'm just much more interested in trying to stage something that's real. Yeah.
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 I love the intention of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was lovely just to remember it, and just the intention of that, just to connect with people in the middle of that kind of, well, it wasn't even the middle, it was, as you say, it was fairly near the beginning of what was a long stretch of austerity. Yeah, so
and like I'd rather be the person who doesn't have a fully properly developed idea for a show and take the leap of faith that is pure of heart, than be the person who I met across the table in Anna McCarrick, who's the cynic. And like I remember feeling kind of stupid when they were saying that to me, but then I was like, but I'm just going to push through this, because like this is my show. You know. And like, yeah, it's actually very hard to be like positive and optimistic and nurturing, and because it's not valued. Like the thing that's valued is intellectualism and just, you know, bollocksy stuff like that, stuff that isn't it is often not valued to make work from the heart. And actually, why are you making it then?
I agree with you. I think you probably answered this already, but maybe you can use the question to talk about this as the funeral of your life or something like that. Is there a particular process you work through every time, or do you shift the process from show to show, or a combination, I suppose? And is there a time difference across different processes, as in, do some projects take longer than others to
Yeah, no, they definitely do. So for me, it always starts with something that's a very strong personal feeling that I have, that I feel like I won't be able to understand this thing in myself, or I unless I explore it through a show, I think. Or like it's a really, really strong personal impulse that I have to examine, and then I choose to examine it artistically. So for example, I've already explained what happened in All Things Considered. It's a nice place to start with one to write the letters to people. In 2013, I made Way Back Home, and that show was about trying to put, again, there was loads of economic downturn narrative around ghost estates, and everybody was just talking about the financial value of the houses. And I felt like, you know, every other night there was a story on the news about money and developers, and there was no kind of consideration to the individual lives that existed behind all these buildings. And if there was, it was I just didn't feel like it was a whole picture. It was presented to us in a way that was suitable for the news. So it was absolute terror and misery, or it was just about banks and mortgages or something like that. So anyway, I made that show about trying to tell stories around how do you tell the story to a child about what has happened, and how can we find a way back home. So that's kind of what that was about, and that was kind of a little bit fairy tale-y and poetic, so just to try and lift the I guess the depth or the sadness of what those stories were about. And so then this is the funeral of your life. I wanted to make that show after my dad died. So going to his funeral, he had been in hospital, and he was 84 and he was dying of old age basically. And we were all together in the hospital for 10 days as he was dying. And, you know, it's a totally crazy time. So I wasn't really thinking about the funeral very much at all. And then, you know, within 2 days of him dying, then the funeral happened, and I hadn't thought about that at all. And then when I went to the funeral, I was like, wow, I was really just totally blown away by how active my father had been in the community, how much he'd contributed to the community, how many people were there to care about him, to care about us, to care about my mother. And there was loads of things that were said about him in the funeral that I'm the number 5 of 6 kids, and I have older siblings, so they all would know, say, the first half of his life, whereas I wouldn't know much more the latter half of his life, because, you know, Dad was always getting older when mostly, like, I mean, when obviously he was agile and stuff when I was younger, but my recollection of him is always in decline. So there was just loads of gas stories about him, and stories about him just being really active and playing loads of sports, and all these Divilman stories, and I just hadn't I hadn't expected them, and it was a whole new way for me to experience my father. So that was one thing. So I was thinking, oh my God, like, his funeral was epic. What the fuck is my funeral going to be like? Like, how am I going to be remembered? What are people going to think of me? And actually that thought just stayed with me a lot. And then I was like, oh my God, like, have I amounted to anything? Am I doing the right things in my life? Am I really enough? And then I thought about that a lot. And then whenever I would mention it to people, like, talk about, I think I'm going to make a show about funerals, because, like, I've been thinking about it a lot after my dad's funeral, and people would be like, oh my God, I think about my own funeral all the time.
Yeah.
But people don't think that it seems like a really self-indulgent thing to get involved in. People don't really think that it's okay to talk about yourself and say, yeah, I've been at my best friend's dad's funeral, or I was at my auntie's funeral, and I was just thinking about myself the whole time. Like, I'm thinking, well, not the whole time, but thinking, like, who am I? What will they say about me? That's basically the thing. How will I be remembered?
Yeah.
And I was thinking, if I'm thinking this, then other people are thinking it. So then we made a show about what would it be like to imagine your own funeral in front of your eyes. So it was quite, like, there was definitely poignant moments in it. It was quite poignant and quite profound, and I tried to honor the experience that I'd had, but by the same token, there was loads of it was really funny. There was a lot of humor in it. There was a lot of wisecrackery in it, and there was a lot, I mean, that's kind of, it's in our culture anyway, the way that we deal with something really fucking grim, the way you deal with something so morose. And so, for example, we had a big scene in it around a wake, and just trying to make sandwiches, and played with the idea of that. And that was actually probably one of the most successful scenes in it, which, you know, I couldn't have envisaged. It came quite late in the process. But yeah, so the answer is, how do I make work? I make it from a personal impulse first, and then, like, for Funeral of Your Life, I thought I was going to work with funeral directors. So I started again, normal stage of what I normally do, reach out to a community, talk to them, see what the crack was. But actually I had to just stop doing that, because the Irish Association of Funeral Directors are very, very, like, they take their jobs so seriously, and they're incredibly respectful of all of their clients. So I could not get any scoop. I could get no story whatsoever. The stories all the time were just so reserved and dignified and polite and protected, which is obviously their job.
Yeah.
But so I was like, oh right, okay, this story has to come from me, and ultimately that was way better.
Yeah.
And yeah, they do take different amounts of time. So for example, right now I'm making a musical about privilege, about inequality. And I've been trying to make that since about 2015. And it's just been such a long road because I don't know whether I was pitching it properly at the beginning or yeah, it's just taken me a long time. I've gone 3 different times to get funding under 3 different guises. Then it had a different title and now it has this title again. And the reason I'm making that, I think, is, I know, is because, I'm from a family of 6 kids and we don't all have the same politics. And I feel like I always get silenced because I'm like the arty one who like cares about inequality, and it's just like, oh my god, shut up, I feel like I get silenced a lot and get over intellectualized a lot and be told to shut up and be told that my information is not. It's almost like the same thing as the person who, like, when you're saying something from the heart, the same as the person who's like, oh really, you're going to make a show about that. I just find it so frustrating, and I find it really hard to be articulate in those moments, and I'm not able to talk about the thing and say the world is fucking unequal and talk about the pain that I feel about that. And because I have siblings who don't feel the same thing as me, I feel like it's like this additional layer of hurt to feel really different to the person that you should feel close to, and also feel like it's really hard to convince other people in society like them, that the world is unequal and we could all just do a little bit to make the world a little bit fucking better. And I'm trying to deal with, I guess, with people close to me who don't believe me or shut me up or treat me as the bleeding heart liberal, and also then how that is really is a frame for the rest of society and for how we keep things unequal. So this is going to be, it sounds heavy, it's going to be a romp. That's why it's a musical, because like, who wants to talk about privilege and all of the different, it's a really difficult subject to talk. Whenever you talk to somebody about how they might benefit from a privilege that they have, it just becomes immediately tense,
Yeah.
because people take it really personally rather than it being systemic. So they get the rage with you and then the conversation's gone again. So that's why it has to be a musical that I can make. So I can be like, here, I'm going to tell you about all the things, and just fool them into enjoying it and go away with a good conscience.
I love it, Louise. I can't wait. It sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, so do you have a favorite moment in presenting work? A moment that has stayed with you, something that was kind of magical? And
so immediately what came to mind when I read that question in the prep is, so as I said, This is the Funeral of Your Life was about my dad, and I am from Laois, and I did a national tour of the show, and the show came back to Laois. So I was presenting my grown-up work in Laois. And like, it's not just because I'm from Laois and then people from the community came to see it and they knew my dad, but for me it's about, oh Jesus, I'm gonna start crying now. It's about personal growth as well. Like, when you're from Laois and you're 15 and you want to be an artist, like, that's, or like, that you want to do drama, like, that is, like, when I was growing up in Laois, there wasn't Laois Youth Theatre or anything like that yet. And also, growing up in a rural community and being expressive is not, it's just like, we're quite inhibited, we're quite oppressed, like, shut the fuck up, would ya? There's just constant,
yeah,
you all right kind of stuff. So it took me leaving Laois and going to Dublin and being like, oh my god, look, he's a goth, this kind of stuff, to have an awakening. And I was also very green, and so to have been able to develop and then become myself and then become an artist and then make a show about my life and know that I was making shows where I was being truthful about myself and about my own biography, and then for that to come back and be in Laois was mental and brilliant. Like, we did a post show and I was really nervous because, Laois is the only county in Ireland that endorsed Gemma Austerity. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's quite a conservative place.
yeah.
And I was like, what are they going to think of me? My pudding bowl haircut and my funky earrings and my, like, like feeling so from somewhere, but also really not feeling from there as well.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. The post show was amazing. Like, people in the post show, they weren't even really, they were just going, can I just say now, I don't have a question. I don't have a question, Louise. I just want to say fair play to you. I remember you playing tennis now when you were about 13, and I seen you once, and now look at you. Like, do you know what I mean? No question at all. I just want to say fair play.
That's brilliant.
Oh, thank you. So thank you so much. I'm just getting delivered a coffee here.
Cheers.
Thanks, baby. So, do you know, like, just people were very, like, proud of me and fair play and kind of, Jesus, I can't believe that's all in your head. And oh my God. And that was completely surreal, because I was like, I'm accepted.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, that felt special.
It was a beautiful piece of work, though, Louise. I remember I went to see it with a good friend of mine, and we laughed and we cried and we reflected and we chatted about it afterwards, and we chatted about it way afterwards again. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I kept the little piece of paper for ages.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was doing a ritual. That was when I burnt it in a ritual, but it was ages after. I had it for a very long time. Like, it was a very well considered, very beautiful piece of work, I thought. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes,
And
I
as well, and very,
yeah.
representative of our culture, as you say, as well.
Yeah.
And very beautiful. Like, the performances were really amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. And I will take that. I feel like it definitely felt like it felt like, I didn't want to go back and keep trying to fix it or do more to it. And I felt that often with my work. I felt like, no, it's finished. Like, it's done and it has integrity and it can just be its own thing now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you included all of us as the audience in a very special way, I thought. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so this is an imaginary question, because obviously we're in lockdown, or whatever we want to call it, pandemonium. So, in the future, unknown, if you were going to make a piece of work with Fatima Groups United and that community, where would you start, or what do you imagine it might look like, or what would be the starting point for you? Yeah.
So yeah, like, I feel like whenever I've gone into something with an idea of what it's going to be, I've had to let that go. And I feel like when I was earlier in my practice, I struggled to let it go, and I'd be like, no, it's going to be this. Because I thought you had to follow through on ideas all the time, rather than, like, it's okay to be flexible.
Yeah.
So I think, in truth, what I would very likely do is I would do some life story work. So I trained with Relive, who are a company in the UK who do loads of work with, well, in loads of different community contexts. So they work with, like, people with dementia, people, ex-army veterans, different kind of communities. They have community choir. Anyway, their mantra, or their saying, is everyone has a story to tell. And I did a workshop with them, like, in 2017, and it really solidified all of the things I'd already been using, but I hadn't really kind of professionalized them yet. So it's the idea of having little prompts or little exercises to help people tell their own story. So I am really interested in biography. I'm massively interested in it. I feel like, as individuals, we never think that we're interesting. Well, usually we don't. And yeah, but you know what I mean? So obviously, I'm like, 2 doses just came into my head straight away. But, like, obviously you don't immediately think, like, you're never going to just walk into a room and start to say, oh, by the way, this thing when I was 6, I remember picking a cherry blossom and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But the thing is, there's these structured exercises that you can use in a nice, safe, creative environment, where people don't realize that they actually have so much of themselves to give and to share in a creative context. Obviously, when you say that to people first, you have to, people get the heebie-jeebies, because you don't want to be singled out. You don't want to be singled out and feel like you have to generate material creatively immediately. But the point is, just in the way that we interact with one another and the way that we tell stories, we're experts in that. We've been doing it for all our lives.
Yeah.
So it's these kind of exercises that you do. So one, for example, is you have a really old suitcase and you pass it around the group and you say, what does this make you think of? You can share if you want to share, you don't have to if you don't want to. Like, think about the smell, or think about, and people say, you know, there's always a like, this reminds me of my granny's house, and you know, but then somebody else could have a completely different thing about, you know, I remember when I was 17 and I decided, you know, I was going to move to Roscommon and my parents weren't up for it. And, you know, there's multiple stories that people have. We all have memories. So it's, I guess they're like memory and reminiscence work as well. So I think what I would do is, you know, do that slowly and in a engaged way with the group, and then see what the natural place to progress with would be. Those exercises can be really fun as well, and can be also kind of heartbreaking and poignant, like, you know, because we all have so many different types of stories, and like it's a very like kind of ethical boundaried environment that you'd be working in. But I just feel like there's a lot, I know in a way you're not really supposed to say empowering people anymore because people can empower themselves, but there's the idea of empowering somebody to tell their story is beautiful. And like, we all, like, I need it as well, do you know what I mean? We all need it, and whenever I'm in those kind of environments, it's amazing to have a structured way with clear permissions about how you can talk about yourself. And I just find it such a good environment to be in. I really I really love listening to people. I really care about people's stories, and it's fascinating. Do you know what I mean? In so many different ways, but not just in a like big, not in a formulaic story way, but in a in a play way, but in a like hodgepodge of multiple experiences, ideas, ways of being or thinking about the world, and people are fascinating.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hopefully we'll get to do that in the not too distant future. It's funny, this is the third one of these, and
Yeah.
we're going to try and meet at least the first 6 of the project artists through this medium for the moment. And like, everyone's answer to that so far has just made me want to do a massive project, you know what I mean?
Yes. Oh my God.
With the project artist, but in, you know, in whatever way you as a project artist want to respond to that, you know what I mean? So yeah, I'm cultivating those thoughts in the background. Okay, so here's the hard one, Louise. What inspires you in any way, shape, or form?
Oh, it's very hard to answer these questions without crying today.
Yeah. Well, you can skip it if you want to.
Like, people who just don't take no for an answer, like Lynn Rowan. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I feel like people who are so confident in advocating for change, but are also full of devilment and full of, do you know what I mean? Like, like people that, you know, are very real, well, like as in, I don't mean well-rounded, but whole people, do you know?
Yeah.
So I think that inspires me, and I feel like that's about anything. So the same with like artists. So somebody who can tell you about their artistry, and you're like hanging on every word, and then they'll like, you know, in the next moment you realize they're human because they, you know, I don't know, drop cream from their eclair on their lap, and then they're hilarious about it.
Yeah.
Like, so I really like people to take themselves seriously, but I also really like people to not take themselves too seriously. So I don't know if that's a really weird answer, but what inspires me is like people who are passionate and who are progressive and try to bring about change in whatever that means, like not just in a political way, but who are real humans as well.
Yeah, that's a brilliant answer. Like, yeah. Okay, and here's one that I always have forgotten to ask in the other sessions, but do you remember the first show you ever saw?
Yes, it was Bosco in Portlaoise Community Hall. So, and I didn't really know what was happening. I'd say maybe I was like 6. It was like when you're the age when your parents don't tell you where you're going or what, you're just like put in the back of the car. So maybe that's younger, maybe that's 5. But I remember there was a girl there, like the fashion was people had shell suits with skirts on top of them. Do you remember that whole buzz? And like hair really up on top of your head. It must have been like peak 80s, 85, 86. Anyway, and yeah, so it was like a community hall in Portlaoise, and you know, everybody sitting on the little benches, all the kids, and really loud and mad. So anyway, we were all sitting on our little benches in the community hall in Portlaoise. It was a church, parish hall, I think. It was beside the church, and I just remember being like completely blown away by the amount of people that were in the hall, and everybody knowing what was going to happen and me not knowing. And then like whew, Bosco popped up, hello boys and girls, and I was like like, you know, Bosco when you're small was just like unreal.
Huge deal.
Say to my kids, I'm like, you're fighting over the remote for Netflix. We used to have to wait, and there was one program on a day.
Yeah.
And you had to wait. There was a lunchtime news, and then there was a really big gap. It was on at 2:20 or 2:30 or something. Then you watch Bosco, and I used to just live for it. I just love Bosco so much. So I do remember seeing that. That's the first thing that came into my head when you asked me. So it's not like, it was just unbelievable. I couldn't believe the Bosco was there.
And Louise, what gives you hope?
I don't know.
Oh.
What gives me hope is I feel like it's people. It's like the same kind of like my Lynn Rowan answer, but just like normal people as well. Obviously Lynn is normal. What gives me hope is like, I don't know. I mean, this is a really hard question to answer at the moment. I think people with just a sense of communion and a sense of development and a sense of play and a sense of like, yeah, breaking the rules a little bit, but not so much that it hurts anyone else.
I like it. And what gives you joy, Louise?
Joy, yeah. So this is an interesting one. Well, it's not. It sounds a bit conventional, but I feel like my children are giving me a lot of joy at the moment. Now, I screamed my head off at Reg yesterday, and I used the F word. So I'm definitely not perfect in that regard. But I feel like, as I have two children, one is 8 and one is 5. One is nearly 8 and one is 5. And like, being an artist and being self-employed and having kids was a total headfuck for me. And it took me a while to come around to it and to release myself to the fact that actually you now have, they're a full-time job and your work is a full-time job, and they're going to ask you for shit all the time and they're going to need you all the time, and it's not their fault that they need those things. But like, for ages I really struggled with the identity of being a parent, and like, it's not like I did a bad job or anything like that so much, but it's just that it just really was such a head fuck for me, and I didn't know that, and nobody tells you that. Everybody, all the narrative is like, I looked at them in my arms and then everything was changed from that moment, and I really have purpose now, and all of this kind of stuff. I never felt any of that, really. Like, I loved my children, I was really glad that I had my children, but it was just so hard to manage my job and manage them and give both of the things the time that they needed. And now with all of this madness, like, I'm at home with them loads and I'm spending, you know, over half a day with them, like just the two of them and me, in a way that I don't have any pressure to go anywhere. I'm not making jobs. I'm not going to go buy such and such to go and paint something. I'm not going to, you know, I'm not filled up, stacked up with jobs all the time that I have actually probably created to escape. And like, they're gas little chaps, you know, they're lovely. Mick, the 5-year-old, is really coming into his own, and because he's been spending so much time with his own brother, like, his speech is developing, and he's very gas, like, do you know what I mean? He's little worlds. So seeing their two little worlds, and like, it's something that I definitely think I will take forward with me and be more mindful about. Like, and I mean that truthfully. I don't mean it in a frivolous way. And I know, like, somebody that I know quite well is deciding to change their job after all this. They're just like, I can't go back to what I'm doing, because, like, obviously it's from a position of privilege to be able to say that. It's not like, you know, we're not two healthcare workers in this house. So actually being two self-employed people is, you know, it has its benefits right now, I guess, in some ways. But yeah, I feel like seeing them for who they are, not who I want them to be, has been giving me joy in a way that I would have thought when the announcement came on the 12th of March, I was like, fuck, what am I going to do? And actually, we're lucky. Do you know what I mean? It's been grand.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know.
And the final question, Louise.
Oh, more.
What message, if any, would you like to send to Fatima Groups United?
I mean, who am I to give you a message? But I feel like it's really exciting that this collaboration or engagement is happening between Fatima and Project. It's been a long time coming. I know the Project for a long time has wanted to have a meaningful community engagement for ages, and I feel like it's great that it's with Fatima. I also love Fatima. I live in Crumlin, so I can walk to Rialto in my 2 kilometers. So I've been going down to the roundabout and back every day. And I did loads of my masters in the F2 Centre. And also one of the women in the group did loads of repeal canvassing, I know, because I looked at the image on the website and I was like, oh my God, I did a few canvases with her. So anyway, my message would be that it's really exciting that we're getting to collaborate in some way, whatever shape or form that ends up being, that you're all brilliant and you're all artists already. Everyone is an artist, and it's going to be really exciting to figure out how that manifests. And keep being deadly and don't say F words at your children like I do.
Thanks so much, Louise. That was really lovely.
Yeah, we might all have to say F words at our children. Do you know what I mean?
I might have to say them at the pigeons. We just don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. We don't know. Oh, okay. I hope it was okay. I mean, look, they're such profound questions in some way. And it's hard to be profound.
I know, but I literally had to write them down because I couldn't have guaranteed that my concentration would have, the first time when we did the first one with Sean, I was like, I don't know if I have the capacity to be spontaneous right now. That was 3 weeks ago. So I literally.
But also, you did a very good job of having your natural speaking voice in the questions. It's lovely and warm.
Well, yeah.
Oh, she's right there.
I know. But it's such a mad time that it's just whatever helps, whatever gets you, Louise, is okay, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, within reason. Yeah. Yeah.
Within reason, babes, yeah.
Yeah, but thanks so much, Louise, and I shall talk to you soon, I hope.
I'm looking forward to giving you a hug when this is all over.
Thank you. I'm looking forward.
With your consent.
Yeah, with full consent. I'll actually consent to that right now. So.
Yeah. Oh, yay! Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, babes. I hope that was okay, and I really appreciate you reaching out to me.
I'm delighted, and I shall email you later on. Sending the love to you. Mwah.
Okay, thanks, babes. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Louise.
Bye.
Bye-bye.